very excited about today's show. We're doing a takeover, and it's a very special edition of Readings at Home. First of all, I'd like to thank Sharon Barker for letting us have a chance to share our work. Asia, 4 letters, 3 billion people. Asian Anthology New Writing Volume 1 is a unique, first of its kind project whose objective is to give new voices from all around the world a chance, as well as more established and prize-winning writers. It has always been my dream to read more of the kind of books that I was raised with. International stories with great storytelling on multiple themes. Apart from the requirement for the writing to be set in Asia, writers of any nationality or gender were eligible to submit for this publication, in keeping with Leopard Print's inclusion and diversity policy. The contributors in this book have come from Malaysia, Singapore, India, Myanmar, Hong Kong, Serbia, Austria, France, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America. As someone who grew up seeking and devouring Asian stories, I consider myself fortunate to be involved in this exciting project as the commissioning editor. It is in our collective interest, as readers and writers, to hear more diverse voices. It takes a village to raise a book. Today we'll be hearing from Patrick Burns, Cheung Louie, Mason Croft, Marc de Faoite, M.K. Eidson, Jenny Hall, Doc Krinberg, myself, Krishnaveni Panikker, Sylvia Petter, Shafiqah, Alliah, Razman, and young Ming. We hope you enjoyed today's show. Let's take it away.
The Pocket Watch Expert of Kalimantan. The second camp visit ends at about 4:30 p.m. and I'm scheduled to take a final helicopter ride back to Balikpapan to complete the day. At the edge of the jungle clearing where the helicopter is due to land, there's a small open-sided structure that looks for all the world like a bus shelter outside some rural English village. There's already one other passenger sitting on the bench under the ATAP cover, an overweight Westerner who looks to be about 40, wearing a battered cowboy hat and carrying a small backpack. We nod and begin the process of conversation as it starts anywhere in the world between strangers. He has oddly combined diction, a sibilant lisp rising over the elastic vowels and rising twine of Texas. He introduces himself as Harold Draymond, but most folks just call me Blondie. I can see why, as he removes his Stetson to wipe the brim. I realise I must know who he is. Well, I don't actually know him, but I know his personnel file. Certain people stick in the mind, and Harold Blondie Draymond is one of them. And he works for the same company as I do and happens to be sitting in a clearing in a rainforest in Borneo. He's not as surprising as it may seem. Blondie's reputation and general eccentricity precede him, both on paper and anecdotally. Although a well-paid expatriate on a rotation assignment, Blondie rarely leaves Indonesia, preferring to take his breaks in Surabaya on Java, where he has a local wife and children. The helicopter's due, and I check the time. My wristwatch, a cheap fake Rolex, has given up the ghost. Until I can find a replacement, I carry an old gold-plated pocket watch that belonged to my grandfather. I pull this out from the depths of my overalls. Blondie gives a low whistle and says, "That sure is nice. Looks like a Waltham from here." I'm not quite sure whether he's lisping the word Waltham or if the watch is a Waltham. I've never inspected it properly, but a closer look at the small logo just below the X11 numeral on the dial tells me it's the latter. I'm impressed he can tell the make of the watch from such a cursory glance over my shoulder. He explains that the shape and style are typical of Waltham from the late 19th century. I pass the timepiece to him, and he opens the back and pulls a small magnifying loupe out of his pocket to inspect it more carefully. We pass an enjoyable 10 minutes with him, telling me an awful lot more about the watch than I suspect I would ever have been able to find out myself. At one point he asks me if I'd like to get some idea of how much it's worth. He proceeds to undo the straps on his backpack, and to my astonishment pulls out a thick, heavily thumbed catalogue. Our conversation is gradually beaten into submission by the increasingly loud drumming of the approaching helicopter. Blondie may look the stereotypical redneck Texan oilman, that's as far as it goes. He tells me, "It's been a great pleasure meeting you, and you look after that purty watch." We climb aboard and the noise prevents any further conversation. We arrive at Balikpapan and it's just about to go dark, process that takes barely minutes this close to the equator. Blondie nods and smiles as he runs over to a waiting truck, and I hang around for a few moments to watch the helicopter's departure. It rises up 20 feet, dips its nose in farewell, rotates 180 degrees, and speeds off into the crepuscular sky, lights blinking. He really says birdie.
Hello, I'm Cheung Louie, and I'll be reading from the story Winter Solstice. Mr. Lau nonchalantly switched on the TV and wolfed down some rice. A familiar news jingle came on. Garmin braced himself. Brainwashing crap, he thought. Welcome to news at 6:30, a female voice said. A rally was held in Edinburgh Square in Central, during which a protester took down a nearby national flag. Garmin, come, eat while it's hot. Mrs. Lau dropped off a glistening piece of salt-baked drumstick in his bowl. This chicken I got from Sister Ling's, 85 Hong Kong dollars a ketty. Not bad. I thought wet markets would all raise prices today. The TV screen was a flurry of banners, batons, pepper sprays, cameras, shoving, shouting, and pointed gun. Huh, Mr. Lau grunted. Mrs. Lau shot him a look. The newsreader, in the same matter-of-fact tone, went on. Financial Secretary Paul Chan said illegal acts like destroying shops not only harm law and order, but also smash the rice bowls of working folks. Huh, Mr. Lau grunted again, louder this time. Mrs. Lau laid down a piece of pak choy cabbage on her mound of rice. Let's watch something else. It's not every day we have a festive family dinner, she said, reaching for the remote. For a while they ate in silence, save for a voice on TV, now on another channel, excitedly announcing one supermarket deal after another against a merry jingle. Suddenly, through the windows came the distant wails of police sirens. Garmin's instinct was to bolt upright, but he kept his head down and strained his ears as he stared at a heap of shrimp shells on the newspaper. He discerned which direction the van was heading and guessed from which police station it had set off. He made a mental note of the time, 1838. Elman Rocker, $99 for two, only $99 for two, gushed a voice on TV. That's a good deal, said Mrs. Lau. Relax, Garmin told himself. It's all right. Other scouts have this covered. What's the use of so much candy? Asked Mr. Lau. What's the use? We can buy it early for Chinese New Year, Mrs. Lau replied. Garmin was vaguely startled. Chinese New Year? For weeks, if not months, he had been living day by day, not knowing what tomorrow would bring or whether there was a tomorrow at all, as the situation spiraled from bad to worse to even worse. There were moments he feared he would not live to see 2020. Yet here was his mother, merrily planning candy for relatives' visit next February, as though everything will be fine. If only everything will be fine. Just then, he heard sirens again, this time closer. What if the dog bit someone? He thought suddenly. I need the loo. He put down his chopsticks. While peeing, he quickly flicked through the 107 new messages on Telegram. Scouts were diligently reporting the whereabouts of police vans in various districts, but save for 1832 Thunder Street auntie in black shirt, short pants arrested, nothing much seemed to be happening in his area. He was about to flush when he sensed that his parents were talking in muffled tones. Funny how they always thought they spoke softly when little could escape earshot in this little flat. Garmin crouched beside the louvered half of the toilet door. Black shot stirring up trouble again, you think? But it's Wednesday solstice, Mrs. Lau whispered. Cockroaches just want to ruin Hong Kong. You think they care what day it is? Mr. Lau said, not so quietly. Garmin sprang up. In a few seconds, had flushed, washed his hands, opened the door, and his parents fell silent. I'm full, he said curtly. I'll sit for a while in my room. As he was closing his bedroom door, he saw his mother shoot his father an angry look. Told you to be quiet, she murmured. Instinctively, he turned the lock, but the lock was jammed. Damn it, he thought. Of course it was jammed. He broke it that day when he woke up with a headache because he had cried himself to bed, sobbing as his heart was breaking over the convict he had never met. That boy lying cold in a desolate car park, now pronounced dead.
So this is an excerpt from Buaya Tembaga, Bujang Sang from the story collection. So let's get started. Sun set like the fade out of a song. A pleasant twilight settled upon Kampong Air Batang as the bar filled up with customers. In the stool next to us, a tourist ordered a bucket of beer for himself. At a nod from Kak, Hakim lit tea candles and placed them along the bar, then the low tables scattered about the beach where customers sat in pairs and sipped from their bottles. Rafi and I were several rounds in, talking about crocodiles for the better part of an hour. Rafi was leaning hard on city folk, saying we scared too easy and hadn't seen a real salty, when he asked me, have you ever heard of Bujang Sang? I shook my head. Biggest salty in history. He killed many people, famous in Sarawak. Watch. He leaned past me and yelled, Hey, Kak! You ever heard of Bujang Sang? Kak was mid-conversation, but she shifted in her stool, paused long enough to say, scary, then turned back. Everyone around the bar agreed. When he saw he had an audience, Rafi ramped up the dramatics. Bujang Sang was a nightmare, over 6 meters long, teeth the size of my forearms, a long white stripe down his back. He hunted the Batang Lupar River for years. Mom always tells us, hurry home or Bujang will get you. They say he catch over 40 people and ate them alive. Even now, I hurry when I go over rivers. They try to catch him many times by professional Ibang crocodile hunters, guys my father knew. They loaded up longboats and searched the rivers with their piranhas. They hunted Bujang for a decade and never found him. Hell, they even brought in a white man to track it. Rafi waved his hand at the tourist next to us. Some uni professor from the US. And still, Bujang would not be caught. It's funny, eh? Load up boats with men and machetes and roar out into the mangroves and find nothing but silt. Crafty bastard, I said. Yes, here is why. Bujang Sang is no crocodile. Rafi leaned closer. His eyes flashed yellow and black in the candlelight. He was a man, a warrior, killed by his enemies, his body thrown in the river. Some say he got cursed by the river spirits to return as a salty. Others say a bone will bring him back from the dead. Whatever you believe, he came back to get revenge on his attackers. When he finished them, their sons and daughters next, he killed for generations. But I was not afraid of him. I knew I would not be eaten. Hakim stopped fishing beer mugs out of the freezer. Wow, such confidence you. Why not? Because, my friend, there are times when a man is more likely to be eaten. When they're near a river, I quipped, which Rafi ignored. Bujang Sang attacks when a man is punik. Punik. Rafi drew out the U sound, pushing his lips towards his nose. Sarawak word, it is. He searched for an answer at the bottom of his beer. When you go to a friend's for dinner and there is no food. Or when you buy a tool and then you want to buy another one. He tried to find a better example. The tourist slipped on his elbow and caught his head before it slammed into the counter. I noticed the large number of bottles lined in front of him. Rafi snapped his fingers. Punik, when a man wants and does not get.
Hello, my name is Marc de Faoite. I lived in Malaysia for 15 years and I left just in January. Now I'm living in France. Thank you to Sharon for inviting me to read today, and thank you to Ivy for featuring my story in the book. The story is called Banu. Banu watched the logging camp from the forest's edge. In the shadows of the giant trees, she was almost invisible. Cicadas screeched their whining song. The men were washing and cooking after their day's work, the air filled with the wood smoke that rose from a small cooking fire. Most of the men were shirtless, thin but muscular, visibly tired. Banu could hear their voices, but could not make out the words. A langur they had shot was skewered on a stick and roasting over the embers. To Banu, the peeled, unmoving body looked just like a human baby and made her hate the men even more. But she took some consolation that they would be plagued that night by the monkey's fleas. Eat and be eaten. Banu knew all about fleas, how their bites were more painful and itched for longer than mosquito bites. This wasn't the first time she'd come here to watch the loggers. When they were away during the day, she walked through their shelter and rifled through their things. But beyond the thin, sweat-soaked foam mattresses and a few clothes and bars of soap, they didn't seem to own much. She should have been at school, but here was better than enduring the beatings the teacher gave her and her classmates. Sometimes he made them hold their ears and squat as punishment for unknown transgressions. Other days, he made them stand out in the hot sun without anything to drink, showing that he had power over them and could do whatever he wanted and get away with it. The day he slid his greasy hand inside Banu's t-shirt, she decided that she would no longer go to school, not even if her mother scolded her. She learned nothing from this teacher. Well, that wasn't entirely true. She learned that men can be as cruel and dangerous as any of the spirits who lived in the forest. But it wasn't that Banu didn't want to learn. The arrival of the loggers opened a door to another world she could only dimly imagine. She observed while staying hidden, the loggers never knowing or suspecting that they were being spied upon by a curious 11-year-old girl. And if you want to know more about Banu and what happens next, you can buy the book, either online or in a bookshop, and preferably a proper bookshop, not a space exploration bookshop. Okay, thank you all. Have a very good day.
Hello, I'm M.K. Eidson, and this is Courier to Seoul. I'm the courier for a U.S. Department of Defense software installation and testing team headed to a military camp in Seoul, South Korea in 1994. It's my job to carry the software to our destination and then carry back classified sample data derived from the testing. I'm the only one on the team certified as a courier. I have an official document requesting that certain items I'm carrying be exempted from examination by airport personnel. When arriving at our destination, we're greeted by a friendly American face, a man we'll call Adam, our liaison for our visit with the South Korean military. He's happy to see us and has a van waiting to take us to our hotel. He inquires as to our flight. I'd slept through most of it. The highlight for me was a stop in Tokyo, Japan, long enough to change planes. No sightseeing, but I could now say I'd been to Japan. Before this flight, I'd never been outside the United States. Adam comes for us early the next morning. We pile in the van and head for the camp. The other 3 members of the team hope to successfully run their software on real data collected at the camp before we return to the U.S. As only the courier, I have absolutely nothing to do between our arrival and departure. A South Korean officer we'll call Lee is assigned to babysit me, primarily because he speaks fluent English. I had tried learning Korean before the trip and had succeeded in learning the pronunciation of symbols, but the meanings of most words still elude me. Thus, all our meaningful conversations are carried out in English. My token efforts to converse in Korean are pathetic. Officer Lee takes me to a nearby museum. Outside, a Korean couple are being married in the shadow of a World War II bomber. It's lovely weather for a wedding. A sign stuck in the grass carries a phrase in Korean with no English translation. I read it aloud. Officer Lee looks impressed, nodding his head. You read that well. I shake my head, but I don't know what it means. He's been speaking English for a few years, and I only started trying to learn Korean 6 weeks ago. I'd bought books and tapes. Korean words were easy to pronounce, so why hadn't I learned more in those 6 weeks? The sign, Officer Lee informs me, says, keep off the grass. We'd walked right across the grass next to the sign. The bridal party is on the grass. It seems no one cares about what the sign has to say, whatever the language. Even when I know the meaning of a Korean word, it isn't always clear to Officer Lee that I'm trying to speak his language. A vending machine offers beverages for sale. I point out a label on the machine and say, ooh, you. He looks at me strangely, a bit hurt. You don't remember my name? I'm Officer Lee. No, I say. I know who you are. I point at the label again, putting my finger closer. Ooh, you. Ah, milk. Yes. Perhaps his chuckle is a bit forced. Thanks for listening.
Hello, I'm Jenny, and you may know me as the author of Laksa Uncle. Here's a section of the story in which you'll learn what makes a bowl of delicious laksa, and I hope you won't get hungry afterwards. At the little shop in the morning, the sound of ringing bells would alert the neighborhood. Then came the sour spicy smell of Assam lemongrass, aromatic enough to activate the olfactory receptors. The stimulating combination was powerful enough to push anyone out of their houses. An old man in his 70s stepped on the pedals of his bicycle while pulling a heavy foot cart behind him. As he moved forward, the white good morning towel around his neck absorbed the sweat falling from his forehead and temples. The cart was a normal roadside stall with 2 embedded pots containing the steaming broth and boiling water each. It was a miracle that the utensils and containers stayed still despite the jostling of the cart as it travels across the asphalt road and rolling gravel. We call him Laksa Uncle, like the delicacy he sold. Laksa Uncle would stop his bike when he saw that someone had halted him at the roadside. He only knew Hokkien, although some people claim he could understand simple Mandarin. I always make my order in Hokkien despite my terrible fluency. Uncle, laksa no bao, I told him, while handing over my 3-layered stainless steel container. Okay. Laksa Uncle began by simmering a handful of thick vermicelli noodles in the boiling water for a few seconds. While his right hand scooped the hot orange-red broth, his left fingers threw the veggies and condiments into the container. Aligning the containers vertically, Laksa Uncle secured them tight. In exchange, I gave him a green 5-ringgit note. The price was not much, but it made Laksa Uncle show off his crooked teeth. At the dining table at home, I divided the noodles and broth for 2 people. One for me and one for my ma. For a bowl of laksa from the streets, the broth had a rich combination of ingredients. The addition of thin mackerel and sardine flakes in the broth enhanced the sweetness and chewy texture. Laksa Uncle had mastered the technique of cooking perfect noodles, smooth slurp, and breakable when gnawed. The evenly sliced onions, cucumber, chili, and pineapple gave the laksa color. A glaze of the black belacan paste elevated the laksa's earthly tang. 20 years already, Uncle still made good laksa. Ma indulged in another sip of the broth. He knew where to get the good ingredients. Laksa Uncle's immovable reputation gained admirers around the neighborhood. He received the admiration of the pasta aunties with the freshly delivered fish and veggies. The boss lady from the spice shop would reserve the best spices for his broth. These gifts propelled his customers to lick their bowls spotless. This was my Saturday's brief moment of bliss. As the weekday weariness wore off, I forgot about my responsibility as a Form 5 student. Screw revisions, Laksa was more important. Sometimes I'll be lucky enough to encounter Laksa Uncle on my way back home from school. By then, he was done for the day, because there were no more laksa noodles or broth to sell. The content smile on his face was enough to motivate himself for the next day. Thank you for listening. I think I'm kind of hungry now, so I'll hand over the reading section to the next author.
Sparkle Fireflies by Krinberg. The blur of the landscape framed in the window made Hotaru's eyes heavy. There was a ground cover of fresh snow from the first day of February that in the train's high-speed viewing made it shimmer as summer beach sand. With an hour until her travel terminated at Shinagawa Station, she stared sleepily out her tinted window and again wondered if she'd done the right thing. Although the idea of fresh snow gave her hope, she took one last look outside and then pulled down the blinds and settled in as the sleek bullet train was hitting maximum speed after the last stop at Hamamatsu. She awoke as they decelerated into Shin-Fuji Station. Fuji-san, visible from the station, stood high in its winter glory, a postcard dressing of white wrapped around it. Yawning and stretching, the vision of Fuji renewed her feelings. Was not Fujiyama the symbol of beauty and perfection? After taking refreshments, she again reflected on why she was en route to Tokyo. Him. He was in his early 50s, fit, and his suit didn't hang on him. Being in retail clothing for the last 10 years, it was the first thing of which he took notice and could spot off the rack a kilometer away. There was an arrogant casualness in how well he looked in his clothes, the subtlety of this act again not lost on her. Turning her smile down at the corners of her mouth, she recalled it was the first flag of attraction when he entered the Miyako Hotel bar alone. Her sister Sora, placing a discreet elbow into her ribs as they enjoyed their weekly after-work cocktail. That one, her sister said, poking her. He walks as if he has a set, unlike some milquetoast salary man. Executive material. Hush, Hotaru whispered. And by then they had locked eyes. Sora was right, she thought. After he slowly walked up to the seated women, he smiled and immediately broke the ice, asking if they were the Makioka sisters, making Sora, the younger sister, an already married, laugh, and stated they weren't seeking a husband for their other sister. They invited him to sit, and ordering fresh drinks, were relieved he was so very confident, humorous and easygoing, not the usually stuttering and nervous wrecks who attempted their company on cocktail nights. He was indeed an executive with a huge shipping corporation in Tokyo, and down in Kyoto purely on business. Staying at the Westin and hearing of the prowess of the Miyako's barman, decided to try his famous Moscow mules. Hotaru looked into her sister's eyes and sent the message that it was time to cut bait, and seeing the look, Sora knew it was time to retire and leave the field to her sister. My husband will be surprised I have cut short cocktail night with my sister, but I must go. Giving Hotaru a kiss on each cheek with a whispered, "Be good," she stood. He already was on his feet, and they gave each other small courteous bows. And it had been a good night.
I'm going to be reading to you from my story, The Dog Walker, which is inspired by my love for dogs. In this satire, a gigantic dog is the silent main character, which connects two worlds in KL, the super rich and the lower middle managerial class. He took a long, hard look, and then he said, "Okay." David So had never had a dog before, but then he'd never lost his job before. There was a first for everything. His 22-year-old niece, Stephanie, who'd never worked a day in her life, now fancied a change. She was going to America to check out the course. It was all right for some people. She'd offered to pay him 200 ringgit a day, expenses on top, David was not in a position to say no. All he had to do was to keep the dog company. Take him for walks, feed him. Seemed like the easiest job. He thought back when he was in PR a year ago, managing a tech firm's marketing and web strategy. He hadn't found anything else since. Soon he would be handling a dog. Now that was a different animal. Having to bite down on his pride whenever he dropped by at his brother's did not make it easier. His brother and sister-in-law ran different businesses morning till night. He never saw them. You wouldn't know they lived here. He looked around him at the dark granite patio with the hammered finish, where the dog had been padding around since living here. The dog's house alone was a mini sandstone temple, with built-in Italian spray taps for washing the stainless steel food and water bowls. There was no denying that his brother had done well for himself. A 5,000 square foot designer house with swimming pool and electronic gates in Mont Chiara, with far-reaching views of Klang Valley. A new black Range Rover, his brother's spare family vehicle, and a couple of less rugged cars, such as a tiny sports Mercedes, which was Stephanie's, and a Prius, the wife's shopping trolley. "His name is Keen," said Stephanie. She wanted a personal maid just for herself, and she got 2, a big dog, and she got 1, and now she decided she'd die for a film studies course in San Francisco, and that too was in the bag. "Pardon?" said David, distracted when he looked straight into the dog's soul, if there was such a thing, and the dog stared back. Keen. Keen was like a long-lost friend found again. The dog's eyes had the sad, downturned look of an ancient lion. Yet he was not old. He was only 4. In human terms, he would be a young, fit, hot-blooded man. David chuckled at the thought. The opposite of him. He was a slight, bespectacled, middle-aged Annie-man, an ex-manager type with no interests except lunch or golf. And even that was now a fantasy. Like going to the moon. His only thrill had been dragging himself to a sports bar in Bangsa village to watch Liverpool's Champions League matches at 3 a.m. Perfect for the unemployed. Golf, private health insurance, gym membership, and lunch at the club had been the perks of his job. His world.
Hello everyone. When the doctor arrived, he pronounced Datin dead. He confirmed that she had a bout of fits, fell into the bathtub and drowned. Police saw no foul play since the doctor who produced the death certificate was aware of Datin's frequent attacks. Tanti knelt beside Datin's casket and whispered a soft farewell to her. Finally, she was laid to rest at the nearby cemetery. It was late evening, and everyone who came to pay their respects for Datin had left the bungalow. The house was very quiet, as everyone has retired to their rooms. Tanti was feeling exhausted and miserable. She was going to miss Datin very much and wondered if she would still be employed now that Datin was no longer around. The thought of leaving the Datin's family made her very sad. She loved working for this family and she was not ready to leave yet. With a heavy heart, Tanti went to her bedroom. She had a splitting headache. She slept the minute her head touched the pillow. Suddenly, Tanti woke up with a start to the sound of someone's pitiful crying. The neighbor's dogs were howling. She sprang out of bed and listened to the strange, spine-chilling sound. Her room was filled with blackness. The eerie sound was coming from inside the house. Tanti looked pale and frightened. She walked slowly to her window. Darkness had followed, and everything was still in the garden, except for a slow breeze. She took a deep breath and looked across the garden. There were some movements among the trees, and she thought she saw a flash of white between the flower pots. Maybe it was a pet cat Putra who loved to wander out looking for his girlfriends. Whatever it was lurking in the shadowy clumps of the bushes. The dogs had not stopped howling, and someone's window was rattling. Suddenly, there were loud knocks on her bedroom door. Tanti screamed and covered her ears. She did not open her door, but bolted it securely. The quick and loud knocks carried on, becoming louder. With trembling hands, Tanti switched on her room light. "Who is it?" Tanti shrieked. The knocks continued. "Who is it, please?" she murmured hoarsely. "Open the door, Tanti. It is Dato," bellowed Dato Johari. Tanti opened the door nervously. Dato and his children were staring at her. All of them looked sleepy. "What was all the noise about, Tanti?" questioned Dato. "Ya, Kakak, we heard someone crying from your room," explained the youngest girl. "I heard the noise too, but it was not from my room, Dato. I think there is someone in the garden," whispered Tanti softly. Dato looked at his maid strangely. Tanti glanced behind him uneasily. Datin's wheelchair was at the stairway. She remembered pushing the wheelchair into her room before retiring to bed. "Why is Datin's wheelchair outside?" asked Tanti with a frown. "Ibu's wheelchair was at the stairway when we came up looking for you," remarked Imran in an irritated tone. Imran never liked her simply because she was very close to his mother. Tanti remembered Datin had joked that the maid was prettier than his girlfriend. "Were you in Ibu's room?" asked Imran. No. I was sound asleep until the eerie crying woke me up," Tanti answered. Ibu's tudung and brooches collections were all scattered on a bed. "It could only be you, Tanti. You're the only one who knew where Mama kept her things." "What were you looking for?" questioned Datin's eldest daughter in a hoarse voice. "Please don't shout at Tanti. I think she's telling the truth." "Why are you all treating her like a thief?" asked Mimi in a pitiful voice. "Mimi, you stay out of this. Just because she's close to Mama doesn't mean she's a good girl. She's an actress. You go to your room now," chided her brother. Nobody spoke for a while. The eerie moans had stopped. Dato Johari was watching his wife's maid. Tears were brimming in her eyes, and she was fidgeting with her buttons on the housecoat. He looked long and hard at her and walked off, and the others followed. Thank you for listening.
This is an extract from Riding the Killer Fish. The next evening they were waiting for me. Mitsu-san placed a tiny bowl before me. "Fugu," he said. Fugu means blowfish, but the words that flashed across my mind were harakiri, sayonara, killerfish. I didn't have the Japanese vocabulary, so with my finger I mimed slitting my throat. But I'd paid my bills, written my letters, paid up my insurance, said my goodbyes. Besides, wasn't I immortal? Hadn't Ben told me? Blowfish is supposed to be served only in specially licensed restaurants, because improperly prepared, it kills instantaneously, painfully. What was more important, a certificate from experts or my trust in my host? Or the certainty that my time could not have come yet? I suddenly knew I wanted to ride rainbows. My gaze clung to the look in Mitsu-san's eyes. I feared for a second. Then Mitsu-san put a finger to his lips. "Shh," he said, and smiled at me in a way that made me reach out, spear a sliver of fish, bring it to my mouth. It tingled on my tongue with the thrill of taboo. I knew something would happen, and then it did. A wave rolled beyond the constraints of language. Mitsu-san's eyes told me that I had passed the trust test. He didn't need to be licensed to know how to serve fugu. I swallowed and smiled. I made the sign of circling finger and thumb to make it look like a lowercase b, B for bon. I'd say bon in Geneva. But here the sign would have to do, even if my hand was trembling. Mitsu-san's wife patted my hand and poured a beer for herself, for her husband, and for me. "Kampai," they said, and we all laughed. I ate with the Mitsus every day. On the day I left Kyoto, we hugged. We exchanged gifts. I gave them a story I had written about a leprechaun eating sushi with a samurai in old Japan. I'd had it translated into Japanese. They gave me a lacquered clay tanuki, a plump raccoon dog, to bring me luck. Luck had been with me, and I had fallen in love with Japan while riding a killifish with a leprechaun.
Hello everyone, my name is Shafiqah Alliah Razman, the writer of Secret Diary of an Outsider or Dari Supi Soramudi in the Asian Anthology New Writing Volume 1. I'll be reading some excerpts from my story, the English translation, which is deftly translated by Ivy, and I hope you will enjoy it. The night came again when the sun said goodbye. Me, my old pen and paper, are still looking for light in the darkness. I was a slave to the fruit of my night's mind, which had asked me to carve on the millions of stars in the sky. It whispered to me, "The stars are shining brightly," and later someone must have heard. Deep in the corner of my heart, a thin feeling throbbed with a delicate touch of fingers, enticing the soul to chant about when the world was sweet and lulled into dreams. Handwriting in black ink is my best bet. My heart's intention is to make a sheet of paper a battleground. Will they listen to the voice of a young woman whose path is still winding, mind confused, and words shackled? I saw my sisters from this small window. I peeked like a child. I saw the fighting spirit being chanted, posters and banners raised, hands outstretched and held tightly, and these set bold steps to the song and rhythm. The belly of the earth and this noble land seemed to vibrate with every rule. You must be horrified, even when you are smiling cynically and carving out ambitions to satisfy your endless avarice. I learned a new word and wrote the noun in my inner dictionary: solidarity. Our mothers had said, "Don't bother, this is not your struggle. Your future is more valuable than ours." But they have been vacant for so long that they feel there is no point writing down dark stories, those too agonizing to be expressed with language and are not spoken openly. My mother's heart was swollen with pain. "Don't worry, Mom. We will sensibly take care of ourselves." Despite being shoved, we did swiftly pick ourselves up. This land is also our future. Where else would we want to run to? Didn't you also say hail in your own country is better than abroad? We crave golden rain on this land. We will bear this trust and responsibility for harmony and justice in our own land. Oh, Mother, do not despair or grieve. Speak up and tell your story to the world. We are here to support and pray for your every step. I remembered your message again, always hovering in my senses like the words of a poet. You said I needed to be brave and my voice was coveted. I've never really been scared, oh inspiration. Those who drown me with the tumult of their tongues stab me as if I were dumb. Don't you see what they did to my brothers and sisters? For a moment my friend and also my confidant shouted poetry from their hearts. They were rebuked and reviled with abusive and evil speech. Don't worry, that didn't break our spirits. See for yourself, every day we are still on the streets, demanding truth and defense, casting a firm voice with our poster wars and graphic art about their despicable treatment. My pen eyes are still sharp and my ink is still flowing fast. A sea of ink, a sea of stories I want to share with the world. There are still many poems of suffering I want to recite, and still thousands of disappointments which have not been sung. Thank you and goodbye.
Hi, I'm Ming. I would like to thank Sharon for giving me this opportunity to read today. I'll be reading Spring Onions, selected for Asian Anthology New Writing Volume 1, which is edited by Ivy. I hope you will enjoy this excerpt. Like most devotees, Ning's mother, Su-yin, spent her Saturday afternoons visiting Singapore's Chinese temples. For the past year, she had meticulously listed them on a piece of neatly folded foolscap paper and visited one each weekend after closing her steam bun shop for the day. She arrived at the temple each week with 2 red plastic bags containing fruit. Ning stood next to her mother, hands clasped, observing her overturn the bags. Apples and oranges tumbled out onto the table. Su-yin assembled them on 2 paper plates in groups of 5 and placed them at the altar. It was done so mechanically that Ning swore her mother could have done it with her eyes closed. That Saturday, Ning had accompanied her mother to Tian Hock King for prayers. Ning was a month away from an examination that had the potential to define her future. After learning about her daughter's dismal mid-year test results, Ning's mother had found it hard to sleep. Ning's older brother, Ren, on the other hand, had fared much better in his academic studies. A student highly regarded by his peers, Ning's mother did not need to worry about her son. Ning had never wanted to be part of this prayer nonsense, but at her mother's insistence, she dragged her feet to the temple. She would consider it a waste of her time. She would rather film a series of life hack videos for TikTok than standing idly at the temple. Ma, why do you offer spring onions to Confucius? Ning asked. Instead of fruit. Ning's mother had prepared a plate of spring onions and steamed buns as offerings to the Confucius statue. Outside, heavy rain fell on the ground like water gushing through a drain. Ning cast a glance at the temple's rooftop, its curved ridges and elongated eaves with upturned swallowtail decoration blocking the grey skies. Fat raindrops began to whip Ning's legs, causing her to retreat further into the temple's statue shelter. Ning's mother had followed her usual practice of waiting for 15 minutes for the gods to eat the offerings before clearing them away. Ning wondered if they liked spring onions. She certainly did not. Spring onion is tong in Mandarin. Tong. It means intelligence. You will need it for your exams, Ning's mother replied, folding her arms across her chest. The smell of the incense coil burning in the main hall spread through the air. Ning was surprised to find the smell soothing, and she likened it to sandalwood incense sticks from her favorite aromatherapy shop. My friend said, praying to Confucius will help you in your exams, Ning's mother said, as she rummaged in her bag for a phone. She fished it out and began to tap away. Ning wanted very much to tell her mother that she was going to fail her upcoming examinations, and no amount of prayers or offerings to any deity would work, but she couldn't summon the courage. Time to clear the table, her mother said, walking towards the altar. Putting her hands together, her mother uttered a few inaudible sentences and bowed to the statue 3 times before shoving the offerings into the plastic bags. Ning followed suit, bowing grudgingly. Under the minimal lighting, her mother had a pale face, her yellow-stained nails and dark circles sagged under her eyes. She wondered why she hadn't noticed those hands and face marked with endless strife and pain. On a one-way street, a solitary car lumbered past them. Ning sidesteps puddles of water scattered along the pavement while swinging the bag of spring onions recklessly. Stop that, her mother said, her voice echoing through the empty street. It's just spring onions, Ning exclaimed in defiance. Her mother slapped her daughter's head lightly. I need to cook this tonight. You think what? I'm going to throw it away, is it? Her mother said. gripping a half-smoked cigarette between her forefinger and third finger. Ning heard her mother mumbling some words in Hokkien as she turned away. She rolled her eyes at the thought of eating a plate of stir-fried spring onions or any dish with spring onions in it. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed the excerpt.
Well, that time went rather quickly. I'm afraid we've got to the end of our show. We hope you've enjoyed listening and watching us read our work as much as we've enjoyed writing and sharing it with you. Asian Anthology New Writing Volume 1 is available from all major online retailers in ebook and paperback format. But if you're in KL, it's available as a paperback from silverfishbooks.com, and that's also a shop in Bangsa Village too. On behalf of all our writers, I'd like to say a big thank you to Sharon Bakar, and I'd like to thank you, our readers, for watching us and listening to us, and most of all, for reading our work. Without you, there'd be no reason for us to write. So thank you very much, and until we meet again, bye!